So, today we will be building the ultimate backwards compatible PlayStation 3. If you remember a few months back, I made a video called Why You Should Buy a Backwards Compatible PlayStation 3, because it has really good coverage. Pair that with your PS5, that way you can play, 5 generations of PlayStation with only 2 consoles. But the big thing with these early models is that there is some reliability concerns. And the cool thing about these early models is that if you're comfortable with servicing them yourselves, so opening them up and doing the standard affair of maintenance, there's actually a few things you can do to them to make sure that they're, really reliable, or is about as reliable as they can get. So we just picked up one right here off of eBay, and these consoles are not cheap. In fact, this entire process won't exactly be cheap. But, and this auction came with some games, so we'll take a look at that in a second. The thing is, with these auctions at least, it's always good to have a spare, genuine controller. This one is a DualShock 3. And considering this is a CCHA01, sometimes it might come with a 6-axis where it doesn't have rumble. But this controller is actually in really good shape. I wasn't even trying to get a spare controller, but always nice to have one of these. In terms of games, again, kind of an added bonus. I wasn't really trying to pick up games, but let's see. The Incredible Hulk, Injustice, Uncharted 2, Ghost Recon, I actually don't have that. Greatest Hits Uncharted, Game of the Year, Arkham City, PlayStation 2, Test Drive, Greatest Hits, Indiana Jones, Greatest Hits, Sonic Unleashed for PS2, blank case, and Major League Baseball 2K7. Alright. This is actually a very nice condition CCHA01. Or about as nice as they're really going to get. So the big thing with these consoles, and you can see everything in the reflection lights, this upper camera here, it's really tough with some of these early models. The whole thing is a glossy black plastic, which I love, but at the same time, because these things are so old, there are micro scratches and damage all over these things when it comes to the used market. So this one actually looks very clean, or at least it has the appearance of looking very clean. If I catch it in the right light, you can see all the little imperfections. But for the most part, this one looks pretty good. And another interesting thing about this particular unit is that the warranty seal is intact, which is very rare for these early models. And for me personally, I've been working on a lot of these machines now, and let me tell you that some of them are in really rough shape depending on the one that you get. So I've seen some at this point that have had a lot of screws inside stripped, missing, ribbon cables that are like just fangled in there, and I had one that was in it was in awful shape. It was still working, but this tells us that it's never actually been serviced. So we've got the confidence to know that we can really keep taking care of this thing, because this model does actually work. Okay, we've got everything laid out here. This PlayStation 3 is going to get the full treatment. New 19-blade fan, a fan potentiometer switch to manually control the speed of it. We've got new thermal pads, thermal paste, solid-state hybrid drive, little feet to raise the system up a little bit because we're going to be drilling holes underneath it to give it more airflow, new power supply, just some general cleaning supplies. We've got it all, so without further ado, let's get started. On these early fat PS3 models, you're going to need a T10 Torx screwdriver to remove the single security screw that keeps the top plate attached. This console has the expected dust and debris that you'd find, but this thing honestly is very clean. I can tell this console doesn't have many hours clocked on it. Keep in mind some of these parts we don't have to remove completely, but for the sake of showing a full disassembly, we're doing that here, especially since we're going to wipe away all that dust anyway. So the good news is that this PS3 has a build date recent enough to actually have the power supply that we're planning on putting in, which is APS226. Launch models and shortly after have the Z series, which run a lot hotter and draw more power. This console already has a good power supply, so we'll keep using this one. Taking off the top plate, we now have some access to the motherboard, and right away we can see the infamous NEC token capacitors. Now, if you remember in that previous video I mentioned that these were the culprits for Yellow Light of Death, as in replacing these could bring a Yellow Light of Death console back to life. Well, recently the folks over at PSX Place have come to the conclusion that this may not be entirely true. In fact, it seems the biggest cause is still likely a BGA problem or failure of the Cell or RSX with proper Syscon troubleshooting. This footage I'm showing you is actually a different console I tested last year when I learned about all this, and as you can see it does require some basic soldering, but since we know the capacitors aren't the major issue, we're going to leave the capacitors on this one alone since we already know this console is in working order. Now, on the back of the board, you can see this is where the CR2032 battery is. If this battery dies, this is that C-bomb issue that's been talked about lately, where you'd have to replace it and then re-authenticate with PSN in the event you want to continue playing digital content offline. Despite this console having low playtime, we still have some very old thermal compound that we can replace. And here we can get a good look at the GPU called the Reality Synthesizer, and the CPU, the infamous Cell Broadband Engine. So the best proactive maintenance we can do is delid both of these and apply new thermal paste. This is where you need to be extremely careful and take this process slow, as you can easily damage the Cell or RSX and effectively kill your console. For this, I'll be using a painter's knife, which is actually a really solid way to cut through the thermal glue that Sony used. We'll just need to apply a small amount of heat for about 30 seconds, and on the RSX we can just work on a single corner and very, very slowly apply pressure into the thermal glue. The RSX is much easier, so you'll see just doing one corner, the plate pops off no problem. The Cell is where most people struggle, because there's thermal glue around nearly the entire thing, so just start from one corner, do not force it, and go slow. Once you've cut in, you can work your way around, and the painter's knife is great here because it has a lot of flex, so you can avoid all the surrounding chips. I'll leave all the tools and products I recommend linked down below for those that are seriously considering trying this, though I highly recommend practicing a D-lid on a dead console first. The last thing we'd want is taking a backwards compatible motherboard out of commission from a first-time attempt. With both plates off, my suspicions were correct. The Cell and RSX are clean. Usually a console with heavy use will have these dies turning a purple bluish color. Now, let's remove all those old thermal pads. For the replacement, you can buy your own sheet and cut them as needed. Go for a thickness of 2 to 2.5 millimeters. There's 5 more pads that go here, but I'm going to go backwards on this and apply them to the shield later. Also, this area right here beneath the CPU, we can place a thermal pad right here, and this should reduce heat a bit. Later consoles, Sony placed a piece here, but earlier models, this area will be uncovered. For the thermal paste, we'll use MX4. It's rated for 8 years. It's a nice high-grade paste that should improve the console's operating temps greatly. A piece size amount is fine. In fact, I probably used too much here. Next up, let's replace the 15 blade fan for a 19 blade one, which should push a lot more air. Here's those remaining 5 thermal pads that we're going to replace. Before we start reassembly, we can apply new thermal paste to the top plates, which for this, you'll want to be very careful making sure the plates aren't sliding off, which you can already see for the Cell. Remember, these were glued down before. You really don't have to reglue them. There will be enough pressure on these when the console is put back together, but if you're not careful on reassembly and these slide off, the console is going to report back a yellow light of death. If that happens, you'll know that the plates fell off, assuming you didn't damage the GPU or CPU during the delid process. Now, this fan mod switch is going to let us manually control the PS3's fan speeds. This is important because this will let us run the fan speeds at a higher setting all the time to keep the temps down on the GPU and CPU. I'll leave this switch linked down below as well. It's a great option if you don't want to jailbreak your PS3 and control the fan speed that way. Before we put the console back together, let's do some cleaning. With the bottom shell cleaned, we're going to use this template to drill holes right where the fan will sit. You don't have to drill all of them. In fact, I only did a handful out of this template, but this will give the console more room to breathe. It's not going to look pretty, but at least this is a part of the console that you don't see too often. Now, I prefer these PS3s in a horizontal orientation, and in order to take advantage of more breathability, we're going to use these little high-5 feet to lift the console up just a bit more. They've got a chrome accent that I think will look quite nice with the PS3's design, but you can also get matte versions of these too. And using double-sided tape, we can place them right next to the original feet, that way you've always got the option to remove them later. Test fitting the motherboard, you can run that fan switch towards the back of the console. Wrapping it in electrical tape, I'm going to install it facing the rear for aesthetic reasons. It'll block a little bit of airflow, but considering all that we're doing right now, we're going to be in good shape still. Next, we'll put the console back together just enough to confirm operation. Alright, she is almost ready to go. For the hard drive, I'm throwing in a 750GB solid-state hybrid drive. This will give us a slight speed increase, since going with an SSD would be expensive and pointless. A solid-state hybrid drive will give us the maximum of what we can really see when it comes to speed improvements. And in terms of size, we could have gone bigger, but 750 will be plenty for the PS3 generation and my personal use. Next, we're going to buff the damaged plastic. Earlier I said this console was in good shape, but under the right light, you can see that it still looks pretty rough. So I've tried a handful of plastic cleaners over the years, and so far this 2-stage Novus cleaner works the best. Not sponsored, by the way, but these happen to give me the best results so far that I've seen. So stage 1 is a basic cleaner. You spray it and buff it out in circular motions. Normally you'd use a new microfiber towel, but this company recommends their own disposable clean wipes, which is kind of a pain, but plastic is sensitive, so they do work, and it's what I've tried on 3 different PS3s thus far. Stage 2 is the buffing compound that will remove light scratches, and same thing here, circular motion. It's important to note though, this will absolutely not restore the console to a like-new finish, so set expectations appropriately, but it can remove a lot of the webbing and improve its appearance in direct light. Now, after buffing, let it dry for a bit, and then go back in and remove that layer. Clean it again with stage 1, which will also add a small protective layer, and you're done. Like I said, not perfect, but it does reduce the webbing and removes a lot of the smaller micro scratches. Depending on the shape that your console is in, you can see even better results. This other console that I worked on looks much better, so the mileage will vary, but it goes a long way in restoring the appearance. And with all of that proactive maintenance done, we have assembled an amazing PlayStation 3 that should operate much more smoothly. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. We might do this again at some point for more PlayStation hardware. It's something that I've always done for a long time, is servicing these machines and also modifying them when it's applicable. So if you enjoyed this, we might do it again at some point. Not entirely sure when, but until then, you could subscribe for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter at Mystic Ryan. And that is it. I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.